this context. And then I wanted to focus a bit on the humanitarian principles and how they are kind of not applied. This situation, and despite the extent of violation of international law, the Central Med is not recognized as a humanitarian crisis. And this creates the basis for the so-called rescue gap that the civil actors try to only partially fill, of course, because it's states who are mandated to coordinate SAR operations. And they do not perceive or recognize the operations and the mandate of civil actors as humanitarian. On the contrary, what happens is considered to be a political crisis that is fueled or even instrumentalized by human smugglers who endanger European security. So the language that applies to this crisis is rather related to defense and security rather than humanitarian needs, humanitarian concerns. That is normally the language that we use when talking about humanitarian operations. Although international humanitarian law is not strictly applicable to SAR operations, there is no conflict ongoing. International maritime law and human rights law do apply, and they provide a strong framework for the prevention of the loss of life at sea, and also guarantee that the right to life and the human rights of people on the move are respected. Just like a quick referral to the law, the duty to render assistance relies on any ship captains. I'm sure Stefano can integrate what I'm saying. Captains are required to provide assistance to anyone in distress without any discrimination. States have a secondary, a complementary obligation to coordinate SAR operations, but it's captains that hold the responsibility to render assistance. In international law, any non-SAR related matters, like the immigration status, for example, shall be dealt with after disembarkation. And this, to me, is the definition of the humanitarian space in SAR operations. So this is the space where human needs and life are protected at the core. What happens instead in practice is that humanitarian principles are dismantled in SAR operations. Principles like humanity, impartiality, that are not given for granted in other contexts, but at least recognized as part of the mandate of humanitarian providers, are not so evident or respected in the Central Med. Humanity meant to be addressing human suffering wherever it is found, paying attention to the most vulnerable. Impartiality meaning that humanitarian assistance should be delivered based on needs alone, are not applicable to what happens in the Central Med on part of states. All shipwrecks should be considered equally vulnerable before international maritime law and also before all the captains and all state authorities. However, the protection of their life comes second to these alleged defense and security concerns. And this means in practice delaying or denying rescue operations, pushing survivors back to where they escaped from in the hands of human smugglers, or even to be victims of violent episodes. On the one hand, neutrality and independence, and I'm meaning here neutrality as engaging in any political or ideological controversy, and independence meaning acting autonomously from any other concern, political, economic, military objectives. Also translate in something very different in the Central Med. The civil actors who provide humanitarian service capacity and expertise are perceived as taking sides or to be complicit with human smugglers. They even accuse us of arranging meetings in the Central Med to exchange migrants. And we are accused of acting against the authorities. Basically, our work is criminalized. despite the states being the ones that act in breach of international law by, as I said before, denying rescues or rescue operations to those in distress. Even allocating and providing funds to civil actors, which is something very transparent and normal in other humanitarian contexts, is considered political and ideological. Germany, for many years, has received pressure from other EU member states because they granted funds to SAR NGOs, and they're not doing it anymore. And in 2023, there was a recommendation that was approved by the European Parliament that called for the establishment of a EU-SAR mission that failed every year to get any budget. I was asked to illustrate some gaps between the laws and what actually happened at sea. Just to make a couple of quick examples, in 2023, Italy adopted a decree that is called the Piantedosi Decree by the name of the minister who adopted it. And this decree creates a de facto code of conduct only for SAR NGOs. And the failure to comply with the provisions included in the decree results in pecuniary sanctions and detentions. So far, there were 34 detention of ships and 2 aircraft. One of the obligations included in the decree is to reach the port of disembarkation without delay, direct route and at a maximum sustainable and continuous speed. And this for several months created a paradox where captains who received distress alerts after a full rescue were instructed by the authorities not to render assistance. So basically the captains who by international law are obligated to render assistance by disobeying Italian authorities would incur into sanctions and face detention. So this was one of the dilemmas that we were forced to deal with over the last years. I'm part of the advocacy department, and it's although advocacy is a key component also in other humanitarian operations, it's not as much as it is in SAR operations. It's a pillar of operations. One of our mandate is to support the operations in the communication with the authorities. And for example, to respond to this decree, we elaborated with our operations department an escalating strategy to question and to address this multiple rescue prohibition. So for example, we established communications for cases that were close to us after the first rescue to make sure that we got the green light to assist. In case the case was too far, we added pressure also through the triangulation of other NGOs that were present in the close to the case or that were operating with us, like alarm phone or air assets, to add pressure on the authorities to intervene. And this was something that we had to work on and elaborate because it was an urgent need to be addressed. Another practice that we challenged in court, but also in advocacy terms, is the illegitimate practice of allocating ports of disembarkation that are very far from the areas of operation in north or central Italy. And what we provided as advocacy department was a lot of arguments in favor of an allocation of a closer port in terms of presenting medical needs, protection needs, and also technical reasons for a closer port, which was basically the only option that was accepted once by the authority because of weather conditions that were too bad to reach a further port. In general, what we do, apart from supporting operations, is that we engage with international organizations and institutions, both at regional level and international level. So we liaise very much with the European Parliament, with the European Commission, but also with international organizations such as IOM, UNHCR, through bilateral and multilateral talks. We also have ad hoc meetings, or we prepare briefing papers in the case of special needs or particularly serious incidents that can have endangered the life of the people that we rescued. And I can make examples if you want later on. What I think were effective channels to challenge the finding power, but have the power to provide expert and independent investigations and reports that support our positions as civil actors. And another way that is, of course, more difficult because it's a more long-term strategy is strategic litigation that has proven to be very effective in SAR operations, because at the end of the day, even if we are criminalized, no NGO operating in SAR operation was ever convicted for performing rescues. And I would stop here for now. Thank you.
I go, Stephanie, I start, huh?
No, sorry, I was struggling to to open my mic. No, I just wanted to say thank you to Francesca for offering the portrait of the legal framework around SAR operations, and also the explaining how this space is thin. No, it's a very shrinking, very small space for the operation. And the difficulties and the pressure on the staff, it was very interesting. And now I wanna give the floor to Camille, who we will move from the policy and the advocacy side to see how is the life on board a rescue vessel where those negotiations take a very human form. Please, Camille.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to this very interesting discussion. So, as introduced by Stephanie, my name is Camille, and I worked as a protection team leader on board the Ocean Viking, a search and rescue vessel operated by SOS Méditerranée in partnership with the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. So I just wanted to start by insisting on the fact that each mission we carry out is unique. Of course, the technical organization of rescues and the way we welcome survivors on board follow really well-established procedures, and we are all trained for that on board. But every mission brings a complete, like a different human reality. We meet people from different communities, speaking different languages, with different experiences, expectation, and level of traumas. So the crew also changes, and this brings like new dynamics and new energies also on board. So even if the structure and the boat is the same, the human experience is never identical, and it always changes. So I also wanted, because I always think like it really explains better what we do when we speak about things that happen. So I really wanted first to tell you a story, a story of a rescue. During one of the patrol I did in October last year, so in 2024, one of the most striking operations happened early in the mission. So we received a distress call on the radio, so a call on the radio saying like men overboard. So it was like dusk at night, and when you hear like man overboard on the radio, you know it's a matter of seconds, of minutes. So our fast rescue boats were launched immediately, and on board the Ocean Viking, we activated the medical emergency plan. So we prepared like stretchers, we prepared the blankets, the oxygen, trauma kits, not knowing in what condition the people we rescued would arrive. At the end, we could rescue all the 6 people that were like at sea, and we learned like later on that those people were forced to jump into the sea. So here again, it illustrates like really well the level of violence we can see at sea, and that the survivors face at sea. The situation was extremely critical, and all were like in shock. So that night, was a reminder of how brutal these crossings have become. They always were, but they're always more and more violent. And even for our experienced crew, it was like deeply like emotional and really like a traumatic event, both for the survivors, but also for us on board. So, and for me, this is where protection starts. We save life, yes, but we also try to restore a sense of safety and dignity after an experience of extreme violence. So when we meet people at sea, as I said, they've already been through extremely hard, long and dangerous journeys. They are exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally, and they carry fear. And it's really important to acknowledge that fear. We would have fear, all of us, after what they've been through, after detention, after torture, after exploitation, and seeing death at sea. So our first duty for me is really like to recognize that fear as legitimate and not as a resistance, because sometimes you don't understand. And for example, just to give you an example, when we meet like unaccompanied minors, sometimes they can be like afraid to say they're under 18 because they don't know their right as children, because they fear of being seen or treated differently or not believed. So that's why protection work is fundamental. And it's not only just about immediate safety, but about like ensuring that survivors understand their rights, and especially like vulnerable people like children and unaccompanied minors. So how do we do protection? So protection is a fundamental principle of SOS Méditerranée. And of course, it's at the core mandate and one of the core things for the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. So that's why I think like the partnership between IFRC and SOS Méditerranée is really rich, because we bring together humanitarian expertise and protection, know how to ensure that every person rescued is treated with dignity and humanity. So when people arrive on board, we start by meeting their most urgent needs. They receive dry clothes, warm food, and a chance to take a shower. And these gestures, even if they seem like really simple, they're quite powerful, because they help people to feel human again. And I personally met a lot of people who told me that it was a first time since a really long time they felt recognized as human again. And for some of them, it didn't happen for weeks, months, and even years. And then the protection takes like many forms. We have a safe space on board the Ocean Viking, where only like women and children can access. It's called the women shelter on board, and where no man, included the male staff, can enter. So it's only for women and children. We provide medical care by a doctor, nurse, and midwife for injuries and immediate injuries like fuel burns, dehydration, but also like chronic illnesses. We also like meet a lot of pregnant women who need like healthcare, because sometimes it's been like a month, they cannot access any kind of healthcare. We provide also reliable information on what happened next after disembarkation, what are their rights, what are the procedure, what is the international protection in Italy, to help reduce anxiety and rumors. And we also identify vulnerabilities. For example, victim of trafficking, victim of torture, sexual violence, to make sure that they are referred appropriately after disembarkation. So we work closely with the Italian authorities to share these protection observations so that survivors can be referred to appropriate shelters or special organizations once on land. For the victim of human trafficking, for example, it's absolutely crucial that they are connected to special structures that can ensure their safety and long-term protection. So protection for me does not work without negotiation and trust, and that's why I'm here today. So on board, negotiation is not only with coast guards or with authorities, it's also with people that we rescue. We live together for days and sometimes a week or more. If before the Piantedosi decree, we could spend like weeks with survivors on board in a confined space, with survivors coming from different countries, religion, and backgrounds, and some people coming from so-called third safe third countries and other coming from active conflict zones. So these differences can lead to misunderstandings between themselves, but also tension sometimes. And protection can become a process of negotiation, of listening, of explaining and reassuring. We do this through a team that is close to the survivors or cultural mediator who speak their language, but also by being creative. We use online translator or simply sometimes we need to take the time to sit and to listen. This proximity helps us to gain their trust and consent, especially when we need to refer someone to the authorities or to special services. And many can be understandably skeptical about any help offered. And I really think that that skepticism is normal. When you spend weeks, months, even years in transit countries where your rights are violated, where you live in fear and deprivation, it's hard to believe that someone will finally respect you and protect you. So that's why for me, like, transparency is essential. We explain who we are, what we do, and what will happen next. And we never promise things that we cannot guarantee. And slowly, and but it goes quite fast because we together on that boat for days. Trust is built, and by conversation, by one gesture at a time. And I really think, like, without trust, there is no protection. So another key part of negotiation is understanding that the group on board is never homogeneous. There are multiple communities, different languages, cultures, and religious practices, and all coexisting in a small space. So sometimes tension arises about space, about food, about prayer, about many things. And in those moments, we rely on dialogue and mediation, working with communities and not only for them. So we can identify, like, informal leaders, people who can help us communicate and maintain calm. By involving them, we give ownership and agency back to the survivor themselves. And that's part of protection too, reinforcing people's dignity and ability to act. So just wanted to conclude by really insisting on the fact that the first rescue I told you about of these 6 people reminds us that behind, like, every number in a report, there are faces, voices, and stories, and protection and negotiation are not abstract principles. They are lived realities, minute by minute, in the middle of the sea. And despite the hardness of the context, it's also where I personally have witnessed extraordinary humanity from survivors, from crew members, and from the solidarity that forms between people who, and only hours before, were strangers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camille. No, thank you for sharing the human reality of the refugees, the level of violence at sea, but also before, on their journey to there. So it was very emotional. But also how it can affect the staff, no? The violence of these crossings. So and that your role is everything but easy. And I really appreciated the link you did with the negotiation with the communities and all the elements that you need to use. No, the transparency. Don't promise something you cannot keep. The transparency and the building trust, which is all the key lessons from most of the humanitarian actors when it comes to negotiation with the communities, and the tension also that can arise in these negotiations, and how you need to de-escalate, find ways to de-escalate this tension. So very interesting, and thank you for sharing these experiences. And also clarifying what it means, protection at sea, because I think this is something that most of humanitarian actors, we don't know. So very key. Now we will shift to Barbara Sartori. Barbara will share the communication and legal negotiations that take place from the ship to the shore. So I'm gonna give you the floor, Barbara, if you're ready. Yes, okay.
Thank you very much. And I do have a PowerPoint, so I'm also going to be sharing my screen, if that's okay. Oh, I think I need permission to share my screen. So yeah, as Stephanie was mentioning, my day job is actually with the CCHN. I'm the head of communication, but in my private capacity, I'm also involved in search and rescue operations at sea, especially with rescue ship, who's a German NGO, as a crew member both on board and on land. Something that I always like to start with is this beautiful map, because I think we sometimes tend to have an idea of search and rescue in the Central Mediterranean as, two or three ships, which tend to be the most mediatized, the one that we hear about on TV. But actually, there's a big community of organizations and actors that are operating in this region, and not just at sea, but also on land and airborne even. And a lot of these tend to be smaller operations, smaller NGOs with smaller boats that are not as heavily mediatized, so we don't hear as much about them unless, of course, people are in the sector. But it's actually a much broader picture than what we tend to see. And the one that I know the most is called Nadir. Nadir is actually a sailing boat, an 18-meter sailing boat. And I always like to point that out at the beginning, because when I mention that I am involved in search and rescue operations on a sailing boat, people tend to, look at me with really big eyes and with an expression on their face that says, what do you think you're doing on a small sailing ship in the middle of the sea? Yeah, and the crew on a deer is also relatively small. It's a 7 people crew, where of course people need to have multiple skills, from technical to nautical to more strategic. And so usually a person tends to do more than one thing at a time. For example, in my case, I am sometimes on the tender, communicating with the people that are being rescued. I'm also sometimes in charge of media, and I'm in charge of liaising with Italian authorities. And yeah, each of the crew members takes care of multiple things. I'm not going to spend too many words on this because Francesca already provided a really good overview. But I think what is particularly interesting from the perspective of these smaller boats in what we call the civil fleet is that the Piantedosi decree really had an impact in recent years of how operations are handled. And I think what is really impacting the most is this one single rescue rule that forces boats to go back to usually mainland Italy after one rescue without the capacity to maybe operate multiple rescues at the same time. And very often, especially in the case of the bigger boats, these ports tend to be very far away in continental Italy, sometimes, Genoa, Ravenna. And even if these boats are fast, it takes days or sometimes weeks to get to the ports. Of course, as Francesca said, this also implied fines and detentions for the boats that do not comply with the rules. And I think we've seen that increasingly, in these past months and year, with a lot of detentions taking place, especially targeting smaller boats. And I will briefly explain how that is happening. So I think what is the main consequence of the Piantedosi decree is that smaller ships are now able to remain operational in the area of operation for a longer time. Because they are smaller, they are not, as well equipped. They also tend to be really, really slow in comparison with bigger ships. They do not have the capacity after a rescue to spend, days and days at sea going to continental Italy. So usually they are redirected to Lampedusa, and this means that it takes, a few hours, and then they can be operational once again. And this made a really big difference in the Central Mediterranean scenario in the past couple of years, because of course they started taking up an increasingly larger portion of rescues at sea. Of course, this was acknowledged by especially the Italian authorities, and we increasingly saw new administrative impediments that began targeting these smaller ships, especially fines and detentions and new obligations. For example, we recently saw a new obligation come up. We are now supposed, after each rescue, the boat needs to deliver what we call an extraordinary event report, explaining the situation that happened at sea. This is not unusual. It's something that is, part of the navigation code. It was already embedded in the law, but requiring this after each rescue, I think it's a very new thing that we only started witnessing this year. Sorry, just moving on. We also started seeing, an increasing amount of reasons why these boats are getting targeted and detained more often. For example, not respecting the instructions, disembarking in the assigned faraway port, and maybe instead choosing a closer port for protection reason or for meteorological nautical reasons. Another major issue has been that of not notifying the relevant authorities at sea when a rescue takes place, and a specific case is that of the so-called Libyan Coast Guard. It's actually very much debated whether they should be notified or not. Some organizations are explicitly choosing not to notify the Libyan Coast Guard because, again, protection reason in view of the recent events of the summer, violating the single rescue rule, not submitting the documentation. And there's an increasingly amount of acts that might lead to heavy fines or detention for weeks and months at a time. So in this scenario, is there any margin left for crews to still negotiate in the rescue operations? And because I also wear a CCHN hat, I've been trying to make the link between what is my experience at sea with the framework and the methodology that we use in the CCHN, especially when we do negotiation workshops. And those of you that attended a negotiation workshop, I think they are probably going to be familiar with this very complicated table that I put on the slide. This is what we call a stakeholder mapping, and it's basically a way to picture the different stakeholders, the different actors that are involved in a negotiation. I think the main counterpart that humanitarians negotiate the most with at sea is called the MRCC, the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center. It's located in Rome within the ministry, and it's really the authority that is deciding and coordinating rescue operations at sea, and the main toughest counterparts. I don't want to get into too much of the details, but I think Stefan is going to present examples of how negotiating with this Maritime Rescue Coordination Center is actually different, also depending on the actors that are operating in the same environment, and how relationship can be very different at the ministry level versus the more local level where authorities operate, for example, the local Coast Guard offices and other actors. I'm just going to spotlight one of these actors because I would love to share a story later, and it's called the CIRM, or the International Radio Medical Center in Rome, and it's the authority that is coordinating medical evacuation, medevac, at sea. And of course, it's more of a technical office that has medical expertise. Well, I'm not going to say more. I'll just keep that for later. So if I had to connect, my negotiation goggles with my experience at sea, I would say that negotiations in search and rescue operations, they really tend to be mostly technical and professional, or at least they are easier to happen when they are focused, on the how situation, how to perform rescue, in which conditions, rather than, of course, tackling major, humanitarian law principles or protection principles in the broader sense. There's very narrow margins for pushing back on these strong, bureaucratic impediments, administrative fines that I just described to you. Of course, people operate in a very strict legal and administrative framework, which makes it really hard, to broaden the boundaries of the negotiation. You still, of course, need to be operating this really narrow frame imposed by the legal framework. The other thing that I find personally really interesting, especially when compared to negotiations happening in the field in many countries, is that a lot of these negotiations are remote. You never see the person you're talking to most of the time because the negotiation is happening through emails, on the phone, on VHF, on radio. And there's a very, very high staff turnover, both on the crew side, and I think Camille mentioned, every time the rotation ends, there's new people, and it's a very different type of expertise of approaches. But also sometimes on the authority side, it's rotating officers that sometimes change. And this is something particularly interesting because at the CCHN, we always put a lot of emphasis, on being able to create these relationships of trust in the longer term with a counterpart, which are really, really challenging in this case when, people are changing all the time. I think things can still be done, around building relationships. I hope Stefan is going to mention because we briefly spoke about it. And I think to me, there's this core dilemma that is really at the center of many negotiations these days. It's the striking balance between, staying true to humanitarian principles and protecting the people on board, respecting, international law, without, pushing back necessarily on these legal procedures, because that's going to result in detentions and fines. And it means that you're not going to be operational for weeks if you get detained. But also, trying to balance this all with the willingness to stay out there at sea for as long as possible, especially in these really difficult situations. And I've had a few days over the summer when I was supporting the crew, and Nadir was one of the 2 or 3 boats present at sea, because a lot of the other boats were either, taking breaks from rotation, or they were being sent to faraway ports, so they were busy for weeks at a time. And of course, in this situation, there's not a lot of actors out at sea. You also feel compelled to remain operational as long as possible. Yeah, just an example that came into my mind when we were, discussing about potentially sharing some of the stories. I was thinking about this one negotiation that took place during my last rotation in last August, I believe. And it was actually a negotiation around the medical evacuation, which is why I mentioned this CIRM in my stakeholder mapping. We had just performed a rescue that was a very, very crowded boat. So we had a lot of people on board. It was a very critical situation because, as I mentioned again, Deer is a very tiny boat. So we were not equipped to take care of many survivors on board. And many of these people we had on board were presenting a medical situation. It was not, an immediate life or death situation, but our doctor on board had identified a few people that presented some concerning symptoms, and one of these was a child, one of these was a pregnant woman. So of course, she raised the issue. We also only have one medical doctor and one paramedic on board usually, so you can also imagine that maybe the situation is not urgently critical, but it's also really straining for such a small team to take care of many, many people who all have, different type of issues and all require care. So the doctor we had on board, she felt that the best way to go was to require a medical evacuation so that people could be treated on land, with all the due equipment and all the capacity that it takes. And she had identified more than 10 people actually that required this type of more urgent assistance. So we phoned up this CHIM, the medical center, and the immediate response received was, no, there's no way we're going to take more than 10 people. You either need to choose or be informed that we might take some or not others, because we feel that these cases are more urgent than these others. However, that would have implied potentially separating some families, which, by the way, is also a very challenging aspect in protection issues, because sometimes it's really hard when you have limited time on a boat to retrace the family links, understand how families are traveling together, who is a family member of which family, especially when there's a language barrier. So the doctor, she was really impressive in her negotiation. What I thought was particularly interesting about the way she handled the negotiation is that instead of leveraging, protection principles or humanitarian law, international law that might not have had such a strong impact in her arguments, she really, focused on the medical ethics, because of course doctors are bound by their ethics, and they also are very, very aware what it means to potentially separate a mother from a child. And she also really pushed the argument of the technical capacity, the very limited technical capacity that we had on board, the rough weather, not being able to ensure the safety of these people. And the argument really worked, because we were able to have this person treated quite quickly on land soon after. And I thought it was an interesting aspect, because she really, she lowered a discussion that could have been extremely political. You do not separate families. And she really lowered to a more professional standards conversation around, ethics, of the profession and the technicalities of the care we were able or not able to provide in that specific moment. I hope I did not speak for too long, but thank you very much.
No, you didn't, and it was very interesting. It was a very graphic presentation of search and rescue.
I also work in communication, so.
No, and thanks for introducing the main counterparts with the map of the CCHN methodology. Also, how you can move from the political to the technical aspect of in a negotiation. So you really connected the work of staff in SAR with the CCHN methodology. But also the dilemma that the humanitarian face. So thanks a lot for that. And now we will hear from Stefano, who lives this dilemma every day in his work. So very happy to have you with us. And the floor is yours, Stefano. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I will speak mostly about the specific case of Aurora Sara, which is the boat I work on. And the boat is a small, fast boat. It's like 14.5 meters, and but is very fast on one hand, and the other hand, it has not much capacity in terms of space, but also fuel, so it cannot stay a long time at sea. I would say not more than 48 hours or something like that, depend on the speed, of course. And this brings to a topic, as Barbara already mentioned, it seemed that the Piante Dosi decree didn't affect us too much, or put in another way, like the small vessels could deal better with the Piante Dosi decree than the bigger one, because, for example, Aurora cannot usually have more than one rescue anyway, and they cannot be sent too far away. So all the restriction and the obstacles that the Piante Dosi decree makes to the civil fleet, they cannot be strongly applied to us, or anyway, they cannot change too much our operation plan. I would say this is true up to one point, because, for example, actually since the beginning, contrarily, like the other sailing boat, for example, Nadir was, at least until a few months ago, had always a close port, like Lampedusa assigned. Aurora, since the beginning, was sent far away. I mean, in Sicily, which is not that far, but it's far from 14 meters boat. I mean, it's as far as we can go. And at the beginning, we tried to oppose this thing, but didn't work out. I mean, we get the detention immediately. So I would say that operationally, like well, at least when we are at sea, the main point of negotiation, the main topic is actually usually the POS assigned, that we, of course, try to contest it in order to try not to go to Sicily and to go to the closest port, which is Lampedusa, because even if sometimes we can make it to reach the Sicily, this means that we lose at least 3 or 4 days of operation, so we are not able to go at sea and helping people again, and at least for 4 days. And of course, also in terms of crew fatigue and in terms of exhaustion of the people, of the guests on board, staying in that boat for like a transit of 20 hours is really exhausting. So this is the main point usually of negotiation. The other point is we often try, if we are not too far from Lampedusa, to stabilize, to make the Coast Guard. Sorry, yes, port. Yeah, coming to stabilize the situation and make the Italian Coast Guard vessel to come and they take the person on board. This will assure that the person there brought quickly at land, and we can continue to help other people. So this is another mitigation negotiation point. And I want to stress out what already Barbara mentioned, that often I found out that it's much more effective to speak with the MRCC Roma, which is the Maritime Coordination Center, about technicalities and like nautical issue or nautical. Okay, already familiar. Nautical topic, instead of bringing out like the fatigue or human rights or rights of the people on the move, which they are not argument that they are very sensitive with. But when it comes to like nautical technicality, we have some margin of negotiation, and I will have an example later about this. And also, I think is very important also like the human factor, in terms that really this leads also a bit to a situation which is kind of random or arbitrary, because it's really depending by the person that is picking up the phone or reply to the mail, how the negotiation can be shaped and sometimes how it goes. So it's sometimes is really random on one end, but also understand who are you dealing with, and also that you need to be able to shape the conversation, having in mind or figuring out which person is on the other side. And I think this is very also a difficult task. Sometimes you don't have margin, sometimes you feel that you have, and you have to play your card carefully. And this is true particularly when you need, for example, information if the Coast Guard are sending assets to your case or to another case or not, which normally they don't give you these informations. But sometimes you find the people that is willing to kind of share this information, and then it's really, I think it's important to consider the human factor. About that, also another specificity of Aurora is that it's a land base, so it stays in Lampedusa as a home harbor, a home port. This means that we have a lot of relation with the local authorities and local coast guards. And this was really important through the years to build this kind of relation, and also in some end this kind of trust, to give us also viability to work on the territory, but also to don't have problems, administrative problem or problems to enter or going out the port, etc. And this, I found out that there are a lot of people from authorities that are kind of interested in what we are doing, kind of recognize our role, and they were also interested in asking openly how we work at sea, how we are organized, and they were willing also to share their experience and also to show us the boat, whatever. And even lately I met a guy from Frontex that really wanted to justify his presence there, saying that he wanted to be recognized by us as a an actor that is not, let's say, that bad as we consider them. Um, um, yeah, so I think at a small, like local level, there are a lot of space to interact. I don't know if I would call it like negotiation, but yeah, it's still open spaces to act and to yeah, create a way to deal and to open also operative space. I think it helps. Just I wanted to share. Yeah, I have to be faster. For example, we had a rescue like 6 months ago, and the weather conditions were really getting bad. But so we asked for a medevac for some people, but we had still like 70 people on board, and the authorities gave us the POS in Sicily, which was clear for us that we cannot reach it. I mean, the boat itself could do it, but of course not with all those people on board. But was not definitely not straightforward to get the permission to go to Lampedusa. So this required a lot of email and also a lot of phone calls in which I think, I mean, I shared my concern speaking about, I mean, as a captain of a boat, and I was like saying that I couldn't understand their decision and stuff like that. And I think even if the situation is kind of clear, and also like you have a lot of strong elements, you need always to build uh, yeah, a pressure and justify every move. And then when we decide to alter the course to get to shelter to Lampedusa without having yet the permission, I think it worked because we built up all this communication pressure since the first time. But again, it's kind of random because it was done 1 month later in almost the same condition, and we got detained. So yeah, I had another example, but I don't think I have the time to share it. So I will stop here, but just to say that I think we have space operationally to negotiate, but is also there is this strong part which is totally arbitrary, and yeah, sometimes we need to do the best with what we have, but doesn't work sometimes, a lot of time. So.
Thanks a lot, Stefano. I really wanted to listen to the last stories, but you're very disciplined, so we can see if maybe the question will guide you to this example. No, thanks for sharing. And one point that you said about the relationship you have with the authorities on land, because you are land-based as well. I think this is very important. It's also a question that came a lot when we did a workshop with humanitarians working at SAR 2 years ago, that this link was a bit missing between people who work in this at sea and the authorities. So the fact that they know you, that you're trying to build trust with them, as you said, no, it's not magical. It doesn't solve everything, but it gives you the legitimacy to ask and maybe have a conversation around what you do. And this Frontex actor who's trying to tell you he's not the bad guy is a very good example also, because he wanted to build a trust with you to work together. So no, super interesting. Yeah. And for the technical negotiation that are always easier, I think it's very common also. When you reach this level, normally it goes better, and when you get to the human level, it's always a bit more difficult when it comes to values of your values and the one of the counterpart. So no, thanks to all the speakers for sharing your experiences and some very emotional statements also that you had. I want to open the floor for questions. I saw already that we have 2 questions. I think maybe I'm going to start with the second question because it's linked to the coordination. Let me check. So, okay. Okay, so it doesn't say to which speaker the questions is, but let's see if one of you wants to answer. What negotiation strategy can ensure safe disembarkation while respecting both humanitarian law and state sovereignty? In what ways do humanitarian principles guide decisions during high-pressure rescue negotiation involving multiple governments? Anyone would like to say something about this? Do you want me to repeat? Oh, it's all good. Or can you see the
Maybe
question?
I can start by saying something, and then my colleagues,
Yes. Yeah, sure.
will complete. So, just on how humanitarian principles guide decision. We save life. So it's our principle. It's our mandate in general. It's what we do. We save life at sea. If I speak for the Ocean Viking, we are a humanitarian service point at sea. We provide assistance. We provide access to basic needs, medical care. We restore family links, and we ensure that people are treated with dignity and safety. And it's legal what we do. We respect the law. We respect the maritime law. We respect the international law by providing assistance to people who are in a distressed boat, who are not able to cross the sea in a good condition. So this is completely this is not everything that we do is legal. It's also coordinated by the authorities in general, and the disembarkation are always also we always are in contact, and we are always we always work with the authorities when we disembark too. So this is yeah, I don't know if my colleagues want to complete me, but yeah, this is just what I wanted to share.
Maybe just one comment on
I think
we lost Francesca.
Yeah, we lost Francesca. Okay, let's wait. Maybe she's gonna come back before Camille leaves. I just wanna because there's a question for you. Sorry, Francesca, we lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I don't know where you lost me, but just
mostly at the beginning.
Oh, okay, great. No, I just said that humanitarian law, as I said, it does not strictly apply to SAR operations, but it's true what Camille said. We are guided by humanitarian principles. We do save lives. I believe what is really relevant in SAR operations, but it's also relevant for other contexts. But since, as you wrote in your question, we are facing these dilemmas in high pressure negotiation. We have to take decisions very rapidly because lives are at risk. Is that each organization normally draw red lines. So, for example, I think Barbara mentioned before. Barbara is very proud that I'm using red lines. But some organizations, for example, do not communicate with Libyan entities, militias, or whoever is at sea on the part of Libya. And for example, in terms of disembarkation, Stefano mentioned place of safety. How do we ensure that the disembarkation is safe? Is declining any place of safety that is not safe. So if Libya or Tunisia propose a port of disembarkation, all NGOs would decline that place of safety. So this is kind of a very strict red line we normally have, and it's not as organization, but as a group of organization, because if one of us accept it, it also reflects upon all the others. So it's something very relevant to be aware of as a group of organization working in SAR operations. So I think we have like red lines and also human rights concerns very clear in our head when we take this sort of decision. But of course, as Stefano said, we also are confronted with very big dilemmas that require ad hoc decisions and very fast decisions. So we need to be very clear on the values we adhere to during the operations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francesca. Can I go to the next question? Because I know that it's for Camille and she might have to leave. So did you see the question? I can say it out loud, but it's about if you're able to share any experiences of SAR when children were involved. I guess the stakes are different then, and I would like she would love to learn. It's Amalia, more about that context.
Yeah, so I mean, in many rescue, we have children. I mean, in most of them, we encounter children that are accompanied with the parents, so who are like coming as, and we are welcoming as a family. But we also encounter a lot of unaccompanied minors, and there are like two different things. So when we have children who are coming with their parents, of course, what is important for us is to respect the family unity and to make sure that they disembark together with the parents who are responsible of the children. So this is something we really take care. And that's why on board the Ocean Viking, we do the kind of a family assessment to be sure we don't miss, because when we disembark them, then they are brought to different reception centers or to different places in Italy. So it's really fundamental for us that the family disembark together. This is already something that for the children who are accompanied, that is like really important. For the unaccompanied minors, I mean, we take like a special care for them. Of course, like there are special places for them on board the Ocean Viking. We try to isolate them from adults. Sometimes we have like very young minors. So I encounter minors of 13 years old who are like traveling alone. And when you meet them, sometimes they started the journey way before. So they left home at 9 years old. So they're like really like lost, really vulnerable. And we take like an extra attention to them. We explain, we really take time to explain their right as minors, as unaccompanied minors in Italy, and we refer them directly to organizations that are like specialized and that will take care of them when we disembark. So yeah, I hope I was complete. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you very much. We also have a question on from Emmanuel Patrick to Francesca and Camille. How can international maritime and refugee laws be better harmonized to clarify state responsibility for rescuing and disembarking migrants in distress? Do you want to go, Francesca?
Yes, I'm just going to be very brief because actually it's very clear. We have a multitude of not only conventions but also guidelines, also interpretation of the laws. It's very clear what the state should be responsible for and the concerns they should take into account when allocating a place of safety. What I think is missing the most is an accountability mechanism for states that are not respecting international law in the Central Med, but also in other routes. I'm thinking of Malta, for example. We always reference to Libya and Tunisia, but Malta is in between. It has a huge search and rescue region, and I think every year they have probably a disembarkation of 100 people in a flow of people that is so big. And they are just willingly disregarding any distress alerts. And they are not held responsible for this. And I think this is a key gap in the system. So I would shift the focus to this.
Yeah. Would you like to add anything, the speakers?
No, Francesca was super clear. Thanks.
Okay, perfect indeed. Okay, now I think if we don't have more questions, I don't see more questions unless I don't see them, Brenda. We're gonna stop here. I just want to thank you very, very much, all the speakers for sharing your experiences, and I also want to remind the participants from today that if you are working in search and rescue and you're interested to know about the methodology of the CCHN and get the support on the humanitarian negotiation, you are very much welcome to register to the workshop that we will host in December. I'll be facilitating the workshop with my colleague Barbara, so we're very much looking forward to spend time and exchange there's a request from Sarah. I love it. Okay, you're right, Sarah. Thank you for jumping in. Let's hear from your last case, Stefano, and then we will stop. If you're okay with it, Stefano, I don't want to
Yeah,
push
yeah,
you too
sure.
hard.
No, it would just to bring another, let's say, small topic that reminds me, like in the last rotation that I did this summer. At some point, we were looking for a boat very close to the Tunisian national water border, the 12 mile zone. So at some point we had a patrol fast vessel from the Tunisian Guard National coming towards us in a very aggressive way. I would say they were lighting at us, shouting at us, and at some point they repeatedly tried to boarding us. Fortunately, this happened very rarely. They were smaller than Aurora, yeah, we managed to not get to not make them approach us, like and board us. But what we did in that case, it was to call them with their official call sign of their boat on the VHF on channel 16, which is for everyone, like the official, let's say, channel of emergency at sea, and everyone has to listen to it. So it's, I mean, our strategy was kind of to make official what they were doing, which because they were just probably trying to, yeah, to make us fear us or make us going away. And our strategy was that to make what they were doing official. So we repeatedly tried to call them on VHF, asking for what they were their intention on, and they never replied, but they kept shouting and tried to. But after like 5 minutes like that, they gave up and they left us stay there and continuing the patrolling. So this just to say that I don't know if it's negotiation, maybe it's more mitigation in this case, but also sometimes try to make behavior like official or asking in an official level can lead to bring back also some actor to correct behavior. And for example, the opposite, when we were doing a rescue, we had just arrived in another rescue like 5 minutes before the Libyan Coast Guard. And in that case, unfortunately, they didn't approach. They came closer to us during the rescue operation, but they didn't actively approach or interfere with the rescue. In that case, we did the opposite. So we didn't consider them and we didn't call them. while if they would intervene, we would try to use the same strategy, try to call down the Chinese CC to make it like official what they're saying. So just to say that another mitigation or negotiation strategy can be try to make or to spotlight officially a behavior that you think is not lawful or correct. And this can sometimes change the equilibrium or the balance of the situation. So you can use it when you think you have to change the status of the action. And in the second case with the Libyan Costa, we wanted to keep it like it was, so we didn't use.
Yeah. I think you used thank you very much, Stefano, for sharing the stories at the demand, at the general demand. I think the first one, it was, I don't know if it's negotiation, but it was definitely using Barbara's mapping to influence the main counterpart and de-escalating the tension. So it's interesting how we can always make link with the humanitarian negotiation in this field, but it's very confrontational and very adversarial, no? In this context. But thank you very much for sharing your stories. Okay, so I think that's it for now. We'll see you in December. And thanks again, everyone, for the presentation. Brenda, did you want to say something?
No, I saw a hand, but it's now
Ah,
yeah.
okay, good. And thanks, Brenda, for coordinating the session today. And we hope we see you in other thematic sessions that we organize on negotiation and humanitarian thematics, everyone. So thanks a lot for being with us, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.